well, dealing with another just colossal issue in the Christian life, and that is pride. Pride besets all of us, and it has been believed to be at the root of so many of our sins. And so we want to keep our children as far away from pride as we can. So the question then is, how do we keep our kids humble, but also affirm them and encourage them and, tell them how good they are? Because it's certainly not the case that you should avoid telling people what they're doing well for fear of puffing them up, because if people are going in the right direction, they need to know that so that they don't divert at some point. So what would you say about managing pride in our kids?
The first thing I would say is that I think it's back to even a little of what we just talked about in terms of modeling. And I talk a lot, Andrew, in my work about how kids learn more from observation than information. They learn way more from watching us than hearing from us. So I think we could talk a lot about humility, but I think if kids don't get to sit front row and see what that looks like on the grown-ups they trust the most in this world, it's really difficult for them to embody humility. So I would, beyond that, look for evidence of that, in the different intersections they're going to have throughout their experience, whether that's a book that we're reading together and there's evidence of humility in a character in a book, or a television show or movie, or the opposite. Obviously, we're going to look at evidence of pride in those places that help kids make those connections. And so I'm a huge advocate of using what's right in front of us. Maybe it's just we're sitting at the airport waiting to board a plane and we see evidence of pride and arrogance playing out in terms of how somebody's interacting with the gate agent versus humility. And so I would look for as many opportunities where we can, some of what I call it, learn through observation, so that kids can make those really good connections. I would say take advantage of as many opportunities as are in front of you, because I think there are times where we're just not going to have to work very hard to find evidence of something that's kind of right around us that could be a place of helping kids make those connections. I would lastly just say that I think kids are going to make those connections all throughout development. And I've sat with parents of kids, let's say who are 10 or 11, 12, who feel fearful that they don't see enough evidence of humility in their kids and worry they haven't done enough. And the reality being that, parenting is a long game. Parenting is a marathon and not a sprint. And so we're not going to see everything coming together by a kid's 12th birthday or 15th birthday or even 18th birthday. And so I certainly would want to challenge parents as they're thinking about wanting to see evidence of their kids embody humility to play the long game of parenting. I would say that quite honestly in a lot of categories, that I think it's easy when we don't see enough evidence on the front side or mastery around certain skill development that parents are wanting to see with kids, that kids are developing creatures. And the truth of the matter is we are as well. And depending on the day, you might see more humility exist in me and you might see more pride. And so they're not finished creatures. We aren't as well.
Yeah, and I think that to be able to see your child, let's say, not manifesting the kind of humility that you want, or really any other virtue, and to be okay with that. Not okay in the sense that pride is okay, but okay in the sense that they're on a journey. You have to have a kind of detachment. I think it's that you cannot let your ego be wrapped up in them, and that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, about performance, is if you put all of your hopes and dreams on what they do, they're going to feel that one way or another, even if you never utter it out loud. So,
can I throw this in, Andrew? I have encouraged a lot of parents over the years when it comes to youth sports, when it comes to athletics, to say, take your kids out for ice cream after a loss, not just after a win, which I think is a concrete way of communicating what I love is to see you do something that you enjoy. My pleasure comes from watching your enjoyment of the sport, your enjoyment of being active, your enjoyment of being a supportive teammate to your friends, all those things. If I only take you out for ice cream over winning, on some level it does communicate. My pleasure rests in your performance and your victory. And so I think that's a concrete, tangible way that parents could even think about walking this out. I would also say to parents, look for evidence, because to your great question, we live in a world that elevates performance. You know, if you were to walk into a lot of schools in this country, the trophy case will be full of athletic and academic accomplishments, as opposed to, I wonder what it would look like if the biggest trophies in the cases of schools were character-driven awards. So because we live in that kind of world where there's a lot of elevation in those spaces, I challenge parents, you know, call out strengths of humility. Call out when you see your kids serving their grandparents. Call out when you see them supporting their siblings. Call out when you see evidence. When you get a call from another parent about how they were a supportive friend to a kid who was struggling at school. I sit with parents who come in sometimes and say the best feedback that I got in our parent-teacher conference had nothing to do with their academic performance, but had everything to do with the teacher saying that my son or my daughter was incredibly aware of a child with special needs in their class. And so call those things out that I think are the ingredients of nurturing humility in the kids we love.
Yeah, and on the subject of pride, I know that you are aware that pride is not just thinking more highly of ourselves than we ought, but a self-centeredness, thinking only of ourselves, you know, our thoughts being consumed with what's going on with me. And I know a big part of your work is helping kids get outside themselves, become aware of those around them, and be able to recognize the emotions of others and respond appropriately. So could you give us some insights on how to help your kids become aware of others and not so self-absorbed?
Yeah. And I think it's probably never been a harder time in history to be parenting in that direction, because we are a world that is consumed with me and self. And I would say first to that, you know, the last third of my new book is called The Strength of Purpose. And I talk a lot about, you know, the obvious of our biblical calling to serve, to love God and love others. But beyond that, you know, in addition to that, there's an overwhelming amount of science, an overwhelming amount of research about how service and outreach and finding our way to purpose improves our health, our physical health, our emotional health, our relational health, like on every level. You know, I included a study that found that middle school students who helped a younger student in a subject that they were stronger in had better academic performance. They did more of their own homework. Like, the giving impacts us in so many different ways, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, on every level. And so I don't think we can lean far enough into that. And I would honestly say, over the course of 25 years of doing this work, the kids that I have been the most concerned about are kids who don't feel a sense of purpose, kids who don't feel like they matter to the world. They don't have opportunities to serve and to give where they understand, you know, whatever it is that I just did, the work of my hands matters to the world in some way. I think that is a dangerous place to be, particularly for kids struggling with anxiety and depression. When you can't find your way to purpose in some way, that's one of the best antidotes to treating anxiety and depression. And so I think it has layers and layers of benefit.
Right. Yeah, the spiritual is so essential when it comes to purpose, because purpose really has to do with, you know, the question of purpose is like the deepest question, and the deepest questions are answered by, you know, religion. But it's not just that, well, you have purpose because God made you, and, you know, theological bullet list, but you have purpose because you can help this person today. You know, putting something physical, putting actions to those spiritual concepts, which I think what you're describing when you talk about getting your kids involved in, outreach and humanitarian efforts.
Absolutely. Absolutely.